It's a very good afternoon to the Sportzfan Radio panel. A lot happening in sport. Gentlemen, I first wanted to talk about the AFLW. Over the last round, we've seen two teams unable to score a goal. St Kilda against Carlton and GWS playing Adelaide. That can't be good for the competition. What worries me is that at the end of this season, 4 new teams will come in, about 130 extra players who will be able to play AFL standard will be required. Where is the competition going, and how can they fix clear systemic problems with what's going on?
Well, it's not a good outcome. You always want more goals than an Anthony Robbins seminar. So in any sport, I'd say. So the drought of scoring can't be good for anyone.
Judge, have you got some thoughts on it?
I have, Professor. I'm afraid I'm going to have to come off the long run today. And I sort of have to establish, I think, my credentials about being a supporter of women's football, which this show has been throughout. So before my current job, I was the lawyer for women's football. I always knew, I'm not just saying this, I always knew that women's football was going to be a revolution. So you can't get greater supporters of the women's game than myself in this program. But what I have to say, Professor, is that a bit of truth-telling needs to be spoken about the game. And I saw that the game yesterday, the Carlton, St Kilda, and a bit of some other games. And I have to say that the real problem is that the standard of the game, I think, is pretty poor, poor to woeful. There are some terrific games, and we saw one a couple of weeks ago with Bulldogs and Adelaide, and they're terrific games. But just watching the game yesterday with St Kilda, it's quite clear that the standard of the players is terrible. You talk about 4 more teams coming in, and if this standard is going to be further diluted, well, look out. It's I said when the game started, 6 years ago, that the comparison I make, and you could say it's an unfair comparison, but it's the only comparison I can make, is comparing it to where you'd put it compared to the men's game. And I thought the AFLW standard about 6 years ago was about 14-year-old boys. And last year I thought it got to the stage of about 17-year-old boys. I saw a football match late last year of an elite 17-year-old kids, boys playing footy. They'd have beaten Carlton AFLW, Kilda AFLW by 10 goals yesterday. Now, you can say, well, they're different games, and yes, they are. But this plays into what I think is the greatest problem with AFLW, and that is that it continues to be part of and influenced by the AFL. Now, I've said this long and hard, and I feel I may almost be becoming a voice in the wilderness about this. I just think women do life differently, and they do sport differently, and they do AFL differently. And when I say AFL, I'm going to stop using the expression, is Australian rules football. And I maintain what I've been saying for a long time, Professor, that the AFL should concentrate on what it does well, which is manage 18 elite men's teams. The AFLW, suburban footy, country footy, etc., should start its own league, Australian Rules Football League, where finally women, I think, will start to take charge of their game, what they love to play. What's happening is putting ourselves under the auspices of the AFL. What have we got? We've got this hopeless season, hottest time of the year, cramped in. COVID's not helping clearly, but the same will happen again next year, where they're playing, 3 games in 2 weeks, 2 games in a week. They're playing in hot conditions, windy conditions, unacceptable ground conditions at a time of the year where we're not into AFL. I might talk about this more with golf and Cam Smith setting a world record in golf recently, and nobody cares. That's because we Australians have got certain seasons where we expect golf to happen. That's the majors, and we don't care about the rest of it. Well, we don't care at this time of the year, at least these days, about watching AFL football. We know that's a March, April to September season. So the women's game is just getting shoved to any part of the calendar that the AFL feels is appropriate. The women's game, I think, is being decimated. It's being ruined, primarily by its association with the AFL. And I keep saying this, that the women have got to break away, that they will never get to a state where they're physically in alignment with the men's game, and thus a genuine alternative to the men's game. That'll take a generation. That'll take 20 years. Coutta and I spoke last week about the fact that the game's been going now for professionally for 6 years, or semi-professionally for 6 years. The fact of the matter is that young girls now see a pathway that they can play, participate in our great game. Well, that's fine, but the 6-year-olds will be of age at 22, 16 years, obviously, from when they were 6, and about 10 years from now, when those girls are starting to come into their own. The standard, as I say, Professor, is if you're expecting a standard similar to what we expect of the men's game, is entirely different and less, and will always suffer from that comparison. If, though, the women's game breaks away from the men's game officially, and the women can actually take control, I don't think Nicole Livingston actually controls the game in any shape or form, then I think we'll start to see some real progress. Back in the old days, when before it was AFLW, when it was women's football, the women didn't see themselves as part of the AFL. They didn't see themselves as inferior to the AFL. They actually consider themselves as having a different product, and a product that they like. I don't know whether those old pioneers look at the game now and say that it's now a better product. There you go. That's my views, Professor. Happy to be excoriated by the panel.
I was just going to say thanks for the warning. You're coming in off a long run-up. I think Joel Garner would be proud of that run-up. I've got disgusting, woeful. Apart from that, you enjoyed the night, though? You enjoyed the game?
Well, it was terrific. For the small crowd, Professor, I know they didn't tell us the crowd. They got off giving crowds for the AFLW. I went to the match report, crowd to TBC. I didn't think the crowd was all that strong. And I just wonder whether playing at Princes Park or Icon is also a good idea. I think one of the beauties of the women's game is played on smaller grounds, more suburban grounds, park grounds, if you like, where 1,000 people make a lot of noise. You put them in a ground of which can take 40,000 people, it looks pretty sparse.
As did the MCG for the 2020 International, when there was, I think, 13,000 on show. The Southern stand completely empty. That was a strange look.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I went to Whitten Oval once, and that was fantastic atmosphere, seeing people coming from all directions to watch the game, and it really united the local community. And obviously the AFL men's team doesn't play there, but it was great to see everyone coming from all directions.
Judge, you're right with that comment about crowds. And I say that because I've had experience of it. Back when I was associated with the VFL, the 1996 grand final was played at Princes Park, and there were about 7,000 people there. And it looked a terrible spectacle. It had no atmosphere. It had nothing. The next year, they played the grand final at Port Melbourne.
There you go.
They got a similar crowd, although 7,000 people at Port Melbourne is almost a sellout. So it suddenly looks like a better spectacle. It sounds like a better spectacle. And I took some sponsors to both games. And at the second game, the sponsor turned to me and said, well, this is better than last year, isn't it? And not only that, it looks like the VFL's going places. Well, it didn't have a bigger crowd. It had a different venue, and therefore it created a different image.
Yeah. Well, that's how the women's used to play on suburban grounds, Professor. And if they got 500 people, which they often would, that's a good, noisy, involved, vocal crowd. You put 500 people at Princes Park, and you say, "Oh, this game's on its way out." Well, it's a false look.
Let me tell you, Judge, I've been at the MCG for a Sheffield Shield match.
Yeah.
The gelding and I went there after we'd had lunch one day. We were looking for something to do, so we decided to go and watch a sporting event. When we walked into the ground, the crowd increased to 10. Believe me, I don't know what the Sheffield Shield cricketers got out of playing in front of 10 people. They should have been playing the game somewhere else.
So the AFL's kidding itself. They want to pretend that the women's game has already reached the heights, and that's why you don't get any criticism of the game. I noticed in the commentary, and by the way, the commentary is starting to drive me a bit nuts with the women's game, but the commentary is never critical. And this is obviously I don't know if it's a set play by the AFL, but it was very uncritical. And I think commentators should be able to say, well, that was woeful. That was appalling. But no, it's all good. It's all up. It's all vibe. And I think it's another problem with the game. Apart from the fact, as I say, the commentary is, leaves a bit to be desired.
Coutta, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, good evening. Nice to be here. I just had a nice sleep just there coming online. So I've got to disagree a little bit with the judge on this, like we normally do. I think that St Kilda is an issue itself. They put themselves up as being pioneers and the like, and they had Peter Sells, the first female coach. Now Peter Sells no longer there, which is fine. I'm not sure that the new appointment of Nikki Del Sando either is. I don't know if he's the right person for the club. I don't think he's ever done a list management, a recruitment. He hasn't coached his own team. He's coached the next generation academy at St Kilda. So how's he being expected to build a club? Now, the two best players for St Kilda, admittedly, are not playing. But they played Carlton yesterday, who are one position above them on the ladder. And they lost by 7 goals. Couldn't kick a goal. Do you know the worst part is that they kicked the first 2 behinds of the game?
So they did, Coutta. In the first 9 minutes, they had, in fact, the first 20 seconds, they had the first point. And then a couple of minutes later, they had a poster, got to say, from 20 metres out. And that was it. That was all their scoring.
And that was it for the day. Now, I watched St Kilda, and they don't look as though they've got a game plan. Now, if you want to look at the video of Nick Del Sando from the week before about the effort that they put in against Brisbane and how he talks about how we're improving. And now yesterday's a massive step backwards for that club, for that list of players, and I would think for their program. The issue you raised earlier, Professor, is that there's going to be 120 new players required to put on AFLW lists, okay? So out of it, where are they going to come from? What they're going to do is they're going to, well, again, I think this will be a show. This will be a show coming up that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go further into this, but out of the clubs, they're going to have to find 130. Now, some of them are affiliated with VFL clubs. So Hawthorn have a VFL club. Excuse me. There's some other ones. So WA, they've got both teams in, but they've got a league underpinning them, John. They've got a seven-team competition in the Waffle. The Sandful is an interesting one. They're obviously got Port Adelaide coming in next year. How many players will go from Adelaide across to Port Adelaide now that the Adelaide Crows have won the flags? And what will happen is that the most marketable person probably in the game, definitely in South Australia, you would expect would go from the Crows across to Port Adelaide, right? Which is Erin Phillips, who's just a freak of a player. So she'll go across. Players will leave Adelaide, go across. Adelaide will then have to, and Port Adelaide will then draw from possibly other clubs getting players to come home, etc. And then what they'll do is they've got a competition in South Australia that is an 8-team competition as well. So they'll bring players from there coming up. But we're asking these players who haven't been drafted or they're playing at these lower comps to come up and play in the AFLW competition immediately and be competitive. So if you look at the Victorian teams, at the moment, John, the VFLW is being played.
Mm-hmm.
The VFLW is being played at the moment. It staggers me that is the case, that it's being played now. It's always been played. The VFLW has always been played during the season, not to satisfy the AFLW. So if you look at the teams that are playing in the VFLW at the moment, you've got Carlton, you've got the Southern Saints, you've got Casey, you've got Darebin, you've got the Bulldogs, Williamstown, Geelong, Hawthorn, North Melbourne, Collingwood, Essendon, Port Melbourne. Now, in there, from my reckoning, there's only 3 clubs that are standalone clubs that aren't affiliated in some way with an AFL club or AFLW club, I should say. So obviously Carlton, the Southern Saints are St Kilda, play out of Trevor Barker Oval down at Sandringham. Again, a horrible place to play footy with that wind, horrible place. You got Casey, who's with the Melbourne AFLW. Darebin are a standalone club who have provided that many players over the years. Like, if you want to talk footy factories, and we love Brian Taylor saying it, Darebin has been the greatest football factory for female football, like, forever. You've got the Bulldogs, you've got Williamstown, Geelong, Hawthorn, North Collingwood, Essendon, Port Melbourne. Now, Hawthorn are coming in next year and Essendon are coming next year. Now, are those teams going to provide those players to go up and play AFLW with players that they get from other clubs? Now, there is nothing to talk about what happens next year. I think what's going to happen is we're going to get the end of the season, award a premiership, and then go, we've got 22 teams, we've got 18 teams next year. We're going to make these rules. You can only take 2 players from each club, maximum, and then go from there. The draft's going to be subsidised, I think, or whatever they're going to do with that. So the teams that have played for years probably don't get a look in until picks 30 to 40 maybe. So you're going to have this compromised draft. That means that AFLW is going to, I think, look stupid again. Like, it's just, because no one knows what's happening. No one knows what it looks like going forward. There is a 10-year plan for women's football, but I can't find or I can't see anything that talks about the AFLW specifically, because that is the product, and we call it a product, but that is a product that's being delivered. And at the moment, I think it's being sold short, which we talk about all the time.
We talked about it last week, Coutta, and I thank you for sending me that plan. I had no idea there was a plan. That's not a plan. That is a marketing document. We talked about management bingo and all the rest of it. That's just full of marketing stuff. I didn't see any real light in the hill in terms of the future of the women's game.
The other thing is the standard of the football has improved. And there will be games, there are games, I should say there will be, but there are games that are horrible to watch. And what happens is I think it changes the standard of both teams. So we talked about the Adelaide Bulldogs game probably being one of the best games of AFLW that's ever been played. Played in perfect conditions in Adelaide at Norwood Oval, which creates good football. When we're playing matches at Casey, when we're playing matches at Maroochydore, Trevor Barker Oval, these grounds that are shocking for even VFL stand. Like, look, think of the number of games that you've watched at Trevor Barker Oval where there hasn't been wind. Think about Casey when there hasn't been wind. And it is shocking footy to watch at those grounds because the wind blows from the east to the west, the west to the east, or the north to the south, or northwest, southeast, whatever it is. And there's predominantly one side that's played. Now, you don't get that if you're playing at like Melbourne, Brisbane tonight, as an example, Professor. It's being played at Carrara or Metricon, whatever it's called now. You won't get that wind. You'll get perfect conditions for two of the best teams in the AFLW to hopefully put on a really good game of footy. Open, expansive, skillful footy being played tonight. I think it's tucked away somewhere on pay TV.
So my fundamental point about the women's game dissociating itself from the AFL, you disagree with. You think the women should... I think you've raised a perfect point. The VFLW would be a far better bedfellow partner for the women's game than the AFL, because I think the VFL is more akin to grassroots sport, which I think is what the women's game is more akin to. The women's game is not an elite game. The AFL is an elite competition, and I think the disparity between the two just becomes more and more evident all the time, particularly, as I say, when the AFL controlling the game shoves the women's game into whatever part of the season it wants to. I think the women's game would be far better joining up with the VFLW. You mentioned Darebin. That's a club that has always genuinely encouraged women's football.
I'll go back a step, is that the AFL should not be involved in AFLW.
Right.
That's clear. That's clear as day. Continues to be. I still don't understand the role of the CEO. I'm still unsure about Nicole's role. She's a great face for it, and that's it. But I don't know actually what she does behind it. The other thing is that, Judge, and this is saying that, like, is that this week there was a photo on Insta or social media with one of the Collingwood players turning up to training in her ambulance gear because she's come straight from work, and it's been praised and all that sort of stuff. Now, the AFL Players Association represents both the AFL and the AFLW players, and we know who the president of the AFL Players Association is. Now, again, shouldn't this be set? I just get the feeling, shouldn't this be separate? Like, the AFL player, like the men will say, well, we deserve this, and then the women will say, well, where's the middle ground if there is going to be anything? There's just so much to work on for this competition. And for me, I love it. I think it's growing. I think the football's getting better. You actually know more players than just Daisy Pearce now. You've got young kids that are going along watching it. Paul's point before about the Western Oval, I had a memory come up this week from 5 years ago, I think it was. Melbourne played the Bulldogs out there in a practice match. So the men played at 4 o'clock, and I think the women then played after it under lights. And you're able to have cans on the hill. You had a big crowd, and the footy was excellent. And suburban community sport at its absolute best. You got the train there. You then get the train out of there, people in all their colours. It's not the sterile, like going to the MCG or the like. It was brilliant. So your issue with Optus Oval, Princess Park, Kia, whatever it's called now, I don't know. It's in Carlton. Is that, John, is now the headquarters of AFLW. That's
Icon.
Yeah, Icon is the home of AFLW. Yeah. That's the facility that they're going to have as their ground. So again, they're sharing it with Carlton. I think the umpires, Professor, you might know, I think the umpires might still be there. So it's not their own ground. It's not their own facility. They're sharing it with the others. And it's a pretty crap ground, to be honest, John. Like, it's just got stands that have been hobbled together.
Yeah, it looks half built.
And now...
I'm very interested, the two of you, though, you talk at length about the game. How could you be so at odds with whether the standard is improving? And you're not just saying it's flatlining, Judge. You are saying the standard is plummeting, and yet we've got Coutta, who knows the sport well as well, saying in his view it's improving. I'm still trying to work out that.
Sure. I think there's a greater disparity between the good teams and the lower teams, and St Kilda is woeful. And I think both of those teams yesterday would have been beaten by a good team of 17-year-old boys, different from the elite teams. The Adelaides, possibly the Crows, the Bulldogs. But what concerns me is not only that it is flatlining at the lower levels, it's going to get worse. Now I know it will get better as the 6-year-olds become the 22-year-olds, but that's going to take, as I say, a generation. And we have to be patient about that. I think people are expecting the standard now to be consistently high, and it's not. And I would think, Coutta, that a lot of people who would have seen the game yesterday would say, gee, I'm not sure if I'm going to spend my hard-earned to come to watch this stuff again.
I agree with what you're saying about yesterday's game. You look at
I don't think it's an aberration, though, Coutta. You think it's an aberration?
What I saw yesterday?
Yeah.
St Kilda, like how long have St Kilda been going, John?
Well, since 2020.
Yeah.
So they've had the opportunity to build a list, right? And they haven't been able to. Mm-hmm. You look at the players yesterday and their skill level yesterday to be able to hit targets or kick the ball or put their head over it, whatever you want to call it, was horrible. Mm. It wasn't called out that. Like that, and I understand your point about the commentary of Australian sport at the moment is that I think it's lowest ebb.
Mm. It's interesting that you mentioned Daisy Pearce. She's been knocked off the duck off his role, I saw. So because she's such good insight on the game, I don't think that's just on gender, that appointment. The viewers genuinely like what she brings to the table, and the duck gone.
So,
explain, Kerry.
But Paul, you raise a point, right? Is that they've had a change, and that's so off cue for channels. So Channel 7, that's very weird for them because they're promoting the arse out of Wayne Carey about his appearing on SAS coming up. But Daisy Pearce's efforts over her commentating or boundary riding career show that she should be doing more than just boundary line, possibly a greater role with special comments, just not Friday night. And she's the greatest promotion for AFLW and for women and girls to go, right, I want to be like Daisy Pearce. I want to be like Erin Phillips, who's a gun, right? So all of a sudden you've got these players that are actually doing things other than football.
Okay, well, look, gentlemen, we might finish on this.
Sorry, Professor, can I just go back to John's point, though, is that the actual commentary around, like it's very nice. Like they don't talk about when a player misses a target by 20 metres and kicks it out of bounds, or they don't say it's a skill error or anything like that. They don't, like, whether that's just something that like the network or the broadcaster said. But we know watching it that the girl on the mark is 20 out and the girl having a shot left to kick at 25. And you know that she's got no chance of making the distance. But the commentators will say she'll go back and she'll put this through. Mm. But that's...
Yeah, it's a men's game.
You think Oprah's commentating, everyone's a winner. You get a prize, you're a winner.
All right, just finish on these stats, gentlemen, and it'll just, I think, highlight the difficulties that AFLW has got coming up. There were 8 teams admitted to the competition in 2017. Of those 8 teams, 5 of them currently comprise the top 6. There were 2 teams admitted in 2019. One of those is in the top 6. One of those is outside. Of the 4 teams that were admitted in 2020, all of them are outside the top 6. 3 of them are in the bottom 4. Now, there's already a huge gap between the teams that were admitted in 2017 and the rest. The figures show that. It's going to be worsened because 4 teams are coming in next season. The AFL hasn't fixed the problem that they've already got, and they're going to add to it. So all I can see is there's certainly going to be dilution. If we look at how the AFL added to the AFL as some guide to how this should happen.
Oh, please.
Teams were admitted to the AFL from back in the 1980s. Then there were a couple in the 1990s, and then in the 20s. So there was never 4 teams admitted at once, and the only time that 2 teams were admitted was when the Bears and West Coast Eagles were admitted in 1987. And they had feeder teams, and we know how the Bears team was put together. They were given 2 cast-offs from each team. So, and just looking at draft concessions, when the Gold Coast came in 2012, or 2011, sorry, in the draft preceding that, these are the Gold Coast concessions. Pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, pick 5, pick 7, pick 9, pick 11, pick 13, pick 15. Now, we've got 4 women's teams coming in. How could, for one team to be at least competitive, they would have to get surely the same concessions that Gold Coast got when they came in, but they can't because there's 4 teams coming in. And then where does that leave the rest of the competition?
Professor, that just shows how the AFL screw it up when they are dealing with the competition which they love, which is the men's competition. Given the competition they really have no interest in, but it's good for their marketing, namely the women's game, it is going to be the greatest schmozzle of all time. Women, get out of there. Get out of there before this gets really ugly. Join the VFL, do whatever, but get out of there because this is just going to get, I think, really bad.
Well, the only problem about that, Judge, is that the VFL is run by the AFL.
Not if they had the Australian Rules Football League, which I'm suggesting. But anyway,
yes,
that's another story.
Professor, can I just go back? Why didn't the AFL just do all 18 teams at once, right? And they did a couple of years of the show. I was going to show the show game of Melbourne versus Bulldogs, and they got to draft a couple of teams, and then they showed that and said this is what. So they got them to play from Darebin and WA and whatever it was, right? Why didn't they at that time just go, right, we're going to get all 18 teams into a competition? Because guess what? We would not be sitting here today talking about admitting 4 clubs and making the competition weaker. We would have been in a position from day one of having 18 teams, and the standard might have been worse at day one, but guess what? We're not here today talking about how crap it is that the AFL is running the women's competition. We're looking at concessions to get 4 teams in, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I know that they couldn't do it because I don't think there was the numbers of females playing footy, or they're able to because of the semi-professional status. But it just seems that from day one, we've been doomed to the way they've done it. And here we are today, what we've got.
Coutta, I'm going to go out and buy a DeLorean and get myself a flux capacitor and do exactly that, because that's the only solution that could happen. And they should have seen that at the time. The fact of the matter is they really didn't care. As long as they were seen to be on the right side of women, who make up almost half the spectators of the game, that was their aim. And the proverbial chickens are coming home to roost.
If I told you, John, that they took on the rules of the AFL, and in the rules after round 1, there was nothing to discuss pregnant players.
All right, gentlemen, we might. Thanks,
Coutta. Sorry to leave it on that point.
We might leave it on that point, Coutta. But thanks for the discussion. Let's face it, there's plenty to do there. We really need. Yes, Coutta.
Professor, I'm going to go another sport now. Is that what's on today, Paul? What's actually on this afternoon, back to back to back?
My work.
Other than your work.
I'm not sure what's on today. There'd be racing if Gelding was on.
No, that's on too, yeah. The NRLW has got 3 matches back to back on TV today.
Yep.
And again, their competition's evolving, but again, are they doing it at the right pace? We don't get to hear much about it down in Melbourne town unless we raise it. But again, that'll be something to watch and see how that's improving as well.
Yep.
Well, I think Paul will have to give us his tips in weeks to come. Paul, we might look at the NRL, and I want to start, given I'm wearing the T-shirt, I want to start with my Bulldogs. 10 new players brought into the team. Addo, Carr and King from the Storm, Dufty and Vaughan from the Dragons, Burton and Naden from the Panthers, Burns and Cook from the Rabbitohs, Pangai Jr. from the Broncos, and Hoffman from the Tigers. I reckon that 8 of those 10 could be in the best 17 picked by the Bulldogs, which means there's a possibility that 50% of the side that runs out for the first game won't have played really a competitive match together. Will the Bulldogs improve, or are they destined to be cellar dwellers again?
Well, you can't get much lower than a wooden spoon, Professor. You don't get 2 of them. So there is only one way up, and that is through the addition of these players. The danger, of course, is that you're going to be like one of those European soccer teams that throws everyone together and expects magic, where you actually need magic through internal chemistry, structures, systems. So the danger is, of course, that they won't all gel, but Phil Gould is in charge. Now, some might smirk, some might laugh. He did set those Panthers up, and he has to take a lot of credit, I think, for where the Panthers are now, which is the best team in the comp, obviously winning it last year. The one I'm looking forward to seeing the most is Matt Burton at number 6. Your risk is that he is, I guess you'd have to call him an organiser. If that's the case, you need some spark from your number 7. Now, Jake Averillo will be your starting 7. Now, he's not a name probably known to non-fans of the code. He's the one who's going to have to step up. You saw with the Rabbitohs, you had Adam Reynolds and Cody Walker, and it's a perfect combination. If Burton and Averillo can form a good halves combination, then you've got the ability to see Josh Addo-Carr, one of the most exciting players in the game, cut loose. You've got Brent Naden, who's a gun player, a premiership player. Weekend at Vaughnies, we've got him, Paul Vaughan, there, so he's going to be in the pack as well. You're in the biggest drought, though, since 1966, Professor. It's been that long in terms of how bad you are. You've won 34 and lost 82 since 2016. So when I say the only way's up, it's a very low bar there, Professor. It's not something Timmy Forsyth would be jumping. It's a low bar that you're coming off. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. You are being described as the most exciting off-season addition seen in many years. So let's see what can happen. Phil Gould knows his rugby league, and so he's the one who'll be running the show. I think you're in for a good year, Professor.
And will Matt Dufty continue to score tries?
Well, we hope we can say each week, don't be a nufty back Matt Dufty to score, and some people can make some nice winnings on that. I tell you, the guy who will be scoring a lot is Xavier Coates at the Storm. I'm predicting he could almost win the medal for best in the game. I'm not saying that lightly. He is possibly the best addition to any club I've seen in many years. The man is a freak. He scored on his first touch in the trial match. So he is just unbelievably good. Could be up there with Tommy Turbo.
Where did he come from, Paul?
Came to the Broncos. How and why they let him go is beyond this pundit. I can tell you, because he is a freak. And just imagine what's going to happen there at the Storm with the delivery he gets. He'll get amazing service there. There is a lot of Storm news at the moment that Redcliffe, they've already poached the Bromwich brothers. I reckon they would have gone after Dad if he played. Craig Bellamy in October said to Wayne Bennett, hands off my players. Well, he didn't hear him because he's got the Bromwich brothers. He's got Felice Kafusi And the big one, he's about to get the halfback, is my male Jerome Hughes, and that will be the first monster signing. If there was any more Storm on show there at the Dolphins, you'd have to call them the Cyclones, Professor. They'd have to change their name, I think, because they're going to have half the Storm team lining up. So Bellamy and Bennett, it's an interesting bit of history there. So whether Wayne Bennett is deliberately targeting Storm players, I don't know. But Jerome Hughes is seeking a very large contract upgrade. He's there for next year. He is probably the best attacking halfback in the game. He's staring down the Storm, and the Storm has a history of not having the gun to the head taken lightly. So I don't know if he'll get what he wants. I think Bennett is going to get Jerome Hughes, and he will be the franchise player to take that, what currently is a dad's army, to actually add some spark and get people watching them. So the Storm have a very big fight on their hands to keep Jerome Hughes.
Cool. Paul, can I just ask you about Bellamy and Bennett? I mentioned earlier about Del Santo. I don't think the coaches are all that big in the game because they don't kick a ball. However, I think the exceptions are people like Bellamy and Bennett because two things. Number one, players seem to want to play for some coaches and they'll play out of their skins. And secondly, some coaches seem to create a culture around a club that other players are desperate to get there. Is that what we're seeing with Bellamy and Bennett?
Well, that's the great word, culture. It is overused. It's almost like that word prodigy is overused as well. I'll never forget, this is before the Rabbitohs became competitive. We had a player who came here to the Storm, that is, when I say in Melbourne, and he said, I never knew I could work that hard. Now, that said two things. One is how hard they work here, and two, how hard the Rabbitohs weren't working their players. And we talked about destination clubs with Grant Thomas. And unfortunately, a team like the Gold Coast Titans was a good destination club because who doesn't want to go to training and then to get your surfboard out and go surfing? In Melbourne, where it's cold as Siberia in winter and they're going for bike rides at 6 a.m., it's a system that gets the best out of those players by working hard. Wayne Bennett is a different style. He's not the volcano that Bellamy is, even though he's calmed down a touch. Bennett gets players who want to play for him, and he knows personalities, and he knows the game back to front. He's helping Adam Reynolds at the Broncos, if you can believe it, still, because they're great mates. And that came about in several years. So Adam Reynolds is asking Wayne Bennett for help. Guess who the Broncos are playing in round one? The Rabbitohs. So I don't think the Rabbitohs would be too happy with Wayne Bennett helping Adam Reynolds out still, even though he's now at the coach at the Dolphins. I think it's more to do with Adam Reynolds being suddenly the superstar that the Broncos were crying out for. Adam Reynolds can't go for a drive without seeing his face on a billboard. So it might be just managing that and keeping his level head and focusing on what he has to do. But the reach of these great coaches, can you imagine Nick Del Santo doing that with a player? Your coaches are so close to these players that they're their sounding board. They're their trusted mentors, even after they've left. That relationship continues. And that's what those two coaches build with their players. And that's why they're so successful. It's going to be interesting to see those Dolphins. They've been hunting and waiting for that type signing. And Jerome Hughes, he wants the mega bucks, the $5 million, I think, over 6 years, which is good money. And who wouldn't want to live in that area? As much as I love Melbourne, it's pretty cold in winter. If you can get that sort of money, he's done it all at the Storm. Whether or not he takes the money, we will see. It'll be his last contract, but the Storm has a habit of just regenerating. They lost all those once-in-a-lifetime players, and they're still the favourites to win it all. So they'll manage if he goes. I think he will. I'm not saying there's anything deceptive going on, but I think Bennett will get his man.
Surely the NRL or the Peter Van Landy's league, who runs the competition, the CEO, if there's been a weaker CEO in any competition or sport, let me know, because he does not speak. Peter V'landys talks about everything. Now, we are biased from a Melbourne's perspective, is that you bring a new team in, one new team, and you can go and poach 4 players from that particular club. Like, that surely is not what bringing a new team into the competition is all about, is going, right, we're going to go plunder and pillage the Melbourne Storm. Now, I think the Storm are okay with a couple to go, no problems.
Yep.
But if they continue to lose players to a new team that comes into the competition with no compensation, let's forget there is no compensation to the club for losing a player. Now, Penrith have lost a player who they deem to be a future champion, and they're up in arms about it. This kid's played one game, hasn't he? Or maybe hasn't played a game.
Who is it? Who are you talking about?
Some young kid, halfback from Penrith. He's Australian schoolboy or something like that. I'll try and find his name. But
probably because they got Nathan Cleary and he can't start, and these players deserve to play first grade. With the when you say poaching, they're out of contract. It's not like he's taking them in contract. With the Bromwich brothers, Kenny's getting on, I think. Jesse, big loss perhaps. Kafusi's getting on. Jerome Hughes, they've got the opportunity to pay the money that the Dolphins will. It's not as if they've all got a salary cap. So they're not doing anything illegal, and it will be great for the state of Queensland, which is rugby league obsessed, for these Dolphins to be good. They've got to get the players from somewhere. I don't think that he's specifically targeting the Storm. Perhaps there's a grudge there. But some of these players, I mean, the Storm have got more riches than Aladdin in his cave. So they'll be okay, and they always regenerate. They're still favourites to win the comp. Point that out. So we will see what happens there. Interestingly, round one for the Storm, they'll be missing Pappenhausen at the back. So that will be a challenge. They are playing the West Tigers, and I think it's on here. So they should be okay, I'd say, the Storm. The one I'm looking forward to, Professor, Storm Rabbitohs round 2. It's a Thursday night. If you've got anything on, gents, you can all join me at that. Looking forward to that match enormously. The 17th of March, that will be. So we're looking at a very good season ahead. I think Philander is doing a good job. It's setting all sorts of records. Last year's grand final, fantastic. And we've got some real teams to watch this year. We've got the Dogs. We've got the Sharks on the up. It's a great area for rugby league. So we'll see what happens. But I think he's doing a good job. I know he can be a bit abrasive, but you've got to be a cut-through type.
Paul, name another competition where the chairman speaks as much as what he does.
Not a great speaker either.
Tell me it's a good thing that the chairman, who is actually the chair of the board, speaks as much as what he does. Tell me who the AFL chair is, for instance.
Yeah, probably one of them. Yeah.
Tell me any sport in Australia that has a chairperson or a chairman that is like Peter V'landys. There isn't, right? And how does that instill any confidence in your staff and your CEO to go, well, what's he going to do now? What's Peter going to do now? Like, he's a cowboy. Good luck to him. He's a marketing person. So be it. But at the end of the day, like you talk about the competition and these players are out of contract and all that. Well, they're out of contract, but they're already signed with the club. They're going to play another season with the Melbourne Storm. And
you'd have to say, I mean, look at Eddie Maguire. I know it didn't end well, but he was the chairman, wasn't he, at Collingwood? And you heard a lot more from him than the CEO. So I think it can. I don't think the CEO is under Eddie. No, they were still running a pretty good setup there. The most membership of any club, and I don't think that CEO under Eddie Maguire was begrudging his public face.
How did that go though?
You can look at how things turn out, but I think that they were a successful club for a long time during that era. And what he did for that club was pretty impressive. I don't know if your CEO has to be out and about and in the face all the time. Maybe just get on with the job, perhaps. But Peter V'landys is the face of the game, and there's no doubt about that. Andrew Abdo's the CEO. Most people wouldn't know that, I guess. If it starts impacting the game in a negative way, then perhaps I'd look at it differently. But I think the game is going very well. The Dolphins can't be a laughing stock. I'm not saying that the code is encouraging them to poach, but they can get club players from where they like, particularly if the players don't think they've got too long left. If Jerome Hughes doesn't get his 5-year upgrade, then he's free to go to the Dolphins. The Storm have got a choice to match it. And he'll probably take less to stay because there's the uncertainty about what this new team's going to be like.
All right, Paul, we might finish on these two. First of all, I noticed that in the All-Star game, something I hadn't noticed in rugby league before, the match was split into 4 quarters.
Yep, just the heater.
How long before Peter V'landys introduces that to the regular season?
I don't think it'll happen. I do like at the end of halves when players are getting tired. That's when you get your exciting moments. The nippier players can cause some havoc and put on some fireworks. So I don't think that will be introduced to the main game. I think that was just because of the heat of when that was played.
And secondly, there was a quote from Adam Reynolds during the week. He said, Kev Walters is a lot like Wayne Bennett. And just left it at that. I'm sure he wasn't saying he's been as successful.
No, well, he's still reaching out to Wayne Bennett, so that's interesting. We'll wait to see how Kev Walters goes at the Broncos. He's starting to get some players there. He's got a very good general in Adam Reynolds, so let's judge Kevin Walters on this year as to how he goes.
Which coach do you see at the moment being on the hottest of seats?
Professor, please.
Come on.
Professor, you've obviously been reading the Herald Sun. The Herald Sun has done AFL coaches that are under pressure, and there's coaches in there that have never coached a game and they're under pressure already, are they? Please. Professor, you're better than that.
I've got to state, there's one man on a seat hotter than anything. If you sit down in Hugh Hefner's spa, it's Trent Barrett, I have to say. Professor, your man. With all those stars on show, if he can't get something happening, he won't be around for too long, especially with Phil Gould at the helm. So that is a hot seat for you, Professor, with your dogs.
Can I just ask Paul, Paul Anders is the chair, isn't he? He's not the CEO of...
CEO is Andrew Abdo.
Comparison, Professor, the chair of the AFL, most people would know this, is a fellow called Richard Goyder. Richard Goyder is a chairman of Woodside Petroleum, Qantas Airways, JDRF Australia, never heard of him, the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, and the Channel 7 Telethon Trust. And he's a West Australian. Now, he ain't got time to have any interest in the AFL. And I would see him as being what they call a steady pair of hands. He'd leave it to everybody else. He'd make the big announcements when the big announcements need to be wheeled out. But otherwise, he's silent. Now, it's fascinating. Compare that to Peter V'landys. You could argue this single-handedly, according to Paul, single-handedly, but certainly predominantly responsible for the game being in the healthy position that it was during COVID and where it is now. You disagree, Peter?
I think that the CEO is there to run the competition.
This is the chairman.
The board is there. So the chairman and the board is there to provide the corporate governance and everything else for competition around structure, around direction and where it heads. Now, we're all agreeing that the AFLW does not seem a priority of the AFL. But that's what the AFL board is there for. It's there for the future generations to come from. Not the CEO. The CEO is there to run a competition. The CEO is there to make sure that the game gets through COVID, it gets through the season, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the role of the board, and that's not the role of the chairperson at the end of the day.
I'm glad V'landys isn't running classical music, because I reckon the cellos would be out the window. Everything would be out. I reckon Akadaka would be on.
Coota, while that's true in pure corporate law, I think things are different when it comes to a sport. I think because we own the game, we're not owned by shareholders, we all own the game. And it's not some sort of private little company that's tucked away with no interest. The AFL is of interest to a lot of Victorians, a lot of Australians. And I think Peter V'landys says that it's my responsibility as head of this, what he would say, is the biggest game in Australia. I disagree, but that's what he'd say. We're in a life or death struggle with the AFL and other sports. I have to get out there and speak and make changes. And I think there is a difference.
No, but that's the role of the CEO. That is the CEO's role, day in, day out. They're living, breathing, they're doing everything right. The AFL board and the like is there to provide the structure and everything behind it. Now, we'll probably disagree on it, but the best board members, like look at Collingwood as an example, absolutely ballsed up the appointment of Dr. Bridie. I was going to say Bridie O'Reilly. That's horrible. But they stuffed that up. She was a board member, I think we all agree, that should be on a board of a footy club or should be involved in. Now, she's outstanding, right? But she would be perfect for a board. She doesn't have to know. Why do you have to know stuff about football to be on a board?
Coota, I think the great Wayne Holsworth put it the best I've heard it. And he said that if the board was worried about what colour the serviettes were going to be at the luncheon, they weren't doing their job properly. And I think that really backs up what you were saying, that the CEO and the administration have the day-to-day running of the league and make sure it gets by from day to day. The board has to have the long-term vision for where they're taking not only the league, but the game itself. And surely the board, the AFL boards come up wanting for when they're looking at the vision for what the AFLW should be.
I think that model's been smashed by Volandis. I've really come around to Volandis, and I think in times of crisis, which they've had, he's been superb.
Is there a board? Is there a board in rugby league?
There is, and I'd say his personality type, when they say some birds aren't meant to be caged, he's the type that is an action man. And I'm pretty sure the CEO doesn't mind that he's so full of bravado and gusto, because he can just get on with running it. He can be the showman and the face and the cut-through type that's been fantastic in rugby league. You cannot argue the game's not going well.
When you say the showman, Paul, I'd give him a bit more credit than that. You look at what he's done for racing, and some can say, bloody New South Wales and what, they're trying to take all the glory from Victoria. But I think it's fairly clever, strategic, profitable, and well planned. So I know he comes across, particularly for Southerners, as being, the mouth from the north. But I think there's a lot more to the guy than just being a talking head.
Oh, he's getting it done. He also has that side to him, yeah. So I'm certainly not saying there's no substance there. He gets it done. He's cut through type, and that's what's needed in this environment, particularly with all the competition from other sports and also people drifting away to streaming platforms, not watching as much sport. So I think he's great.
That last point that Paul's just raised there, I don't care what sport you're talking about, but if we want to talk about eyeballs on sport, it's not being at the grounds anymore. It's not being at the matches.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that what this most recent T20 series has shown, like, did you know there's another T20 in Melbourne today?
No.
Didn't even know.
Didn't know.
There's one in Melbourne today. The last match of the series, 5 kilometres down the road, it might even be less. You've got the Victorians playing in a Sheffield Shield match. I think it's being played at the Junction Oval. Wouldn't it be perfect, right? You play the Sheffield Shield during the day, and then why wouldn't you just do the T20 straight after it? All the punters get to watch the best going on the Sheffield Shield, and then get to watch a T20 that's effectively meaningless because it's 4-0 series. The other night, Judge, there were 13,000 people at the ground. Now, I don't know whether they include the players, the staff, the employees of the ground, security guards, whatever it is. But that competition, I think Big Bash has talked about it here before. Rugby League knows their crowds. They know what they're going to get. We do have a laugh about them. But they can get their 8,000. They can get their 10,000, Paul. But guess what? They're comfortable knowing that that's what they're going to get. It's not like the Big Bash thinking they're going to get back to the glory days of 70 to 80,000 for the crosstown rivals, the Melbourne Renegades playing the Melbourne Stars. And now we've got the world champion, work with me on this, we've got the world champion T20 playing a meaningless dead rubber at the MCG on a Sunday afternoon or evening, whatever it is, and they'll be lucky to get maybe 15,000 there, and 90% of the crowd will be Sri Lankan. An indictment on Cricket Australia.
The other day, Coutta, I heard some stats about a player, about how many international T20s he played. Yeah. A, I couldn't believe how many he'd played, and B, I couldn't give a stuff. I mean, the stats in T20 Big Bash are absolutely meaningless because once the game's finished, nobody remembers anything about any of it. Whereas we've all got collective memory of sport, which just sticks in our memory for forever. Because it used to mean something. I think a lot of sport is becoming meaningless. Television fodder.
Do you remember when we had the ISC triple or the I was going to say round robin, it wasn't, the international series where you'd have 3 teams, the tri-series.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you'd have like the West
Yes. Yep.
England.
Yep.
So you'd have teams come out that would play test matches prior, and then you'd have ones that play test matches after it. And you go back to that, the crowds, the jumpers, the grounds were packed on a Saturday afternoon. You had kids and everyone there. Now, 50 over cricket is struggling just as much as T20. So cricket has been so heavily focused on giving Justin Langer the arse that all of a sudden, from a crowd perspective, they're in Barney rubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coutta,
All
I
right.
can remember sorry, Coutta, Professor, go on.
No, I was just about to say, Judge, this is the Thinking Person Sports Show. We could perhaps combine all of those things that we can't remember, those sporting contests, and call them ephemera.
Lovely.
Oh.
Yep. Very good.
I've never
All right.
heard Peter Volandis use that word.
But isn't it though, Professor? But it is like the other night you had the other week you had the rugby with Paul. You had the All Stars game. Fantastic concept, and it was a great concept. Sorry, great concept, but it was a great standard. And it actually, I don't say this disparagingly, but it actually meant something.
A lot. Yeah.
Whereas you've got this T20, which is sort of like it could be 5-0, and well, guess what?
Yeah.
Who gives a toss?
Perhaps something to look at, Coutta, and that is when the World Series gets to a point where one team has the superior win rate and can't be beaten, the dead rubbers aren't played.
Well, Professor, or play the game in Maui or Shepparton or Traralgon or Geelong. Like, why does it have to be played at the MCG when 13,000 people in a stadium that seats 100,000?
You mean at one of the Commonwealth Games venues? We haven't spoken about that today.
Well, honestly, it's quite amazing, isn't it, that we're going to.
Sorry, just on that, 1 second, Professor Coutta. I recommended to the Mayor of Wangaratta last week that Wangaratta apply for the tennis for the Commonwealth Games. They used to play it in the Commonwealth Games. Best tennis courts in Victoria and Wangaratta in the country. And he's taken on board, and we'll just see how that goes. But I'd love to see the tennis Commonwealth Games at Wang, at possibly Shepparton as well. Anyway, we'll see how it happens.
Coutta, isn't that good? We won. Like we're in a bidding war with ourselves. We won it. We're going to be the venue. Nobody else wanted it.
Isn't that terrific, Professor? Also, we really haven't talked about Djokovic today either. I thought
Good.
we'd bring his name up today to say that
We have now.
he's not worried now about the Grand Slam records and that he's not vaccinated. He is not vaccinated. So all that hoo-ha, and it has gone silent. Paul, he's around town. I think the CEO or the tournament director, I think he's still around town at the moment. So he's going all right, isn't he?
I thought you meant Djokovic is around town. You must have checked the news.
All right, gentlemen, I've been substituted in by the gelding to give the tips today. Unfortunately, he gave me 2 for Ballarat. The first race is already run, so he'll be really upset that I didn't get this one out. What he did point out was that Craig Williams is at Ballarat today for 2 rides.
And it won.
He reckons he hasn't gone there for a haircut.
Or to see the Sovereign Hill.
In the first race, he was going to back horse 1 Jester.
And it won.
That won, paid under $2. So odds on look on, but he believes that in race 4, horse 4 Bartolini, both of the rides are for Chris Wallace. So Willow's probably going to get a double out of day. And it's Cup Day at Maui, where there is the Churchill, Morwell, Trafalgar, Newborough, Yarragon, Yallourn, North and Warragul Cups.
What? It's a mouthful.
Yeah. So race 3, the Newborough Cup, horse 3, Tippin Woody, a Mick Price horse being ridden by Liam Riordan, $4 the win at the moment. And race 5, horse 7, Free Flying Star, Paddy Payne in the Yarragon Cup. So they're Gelding's tips for today. And he's a bit dirty yesterday. He said he was robbed by the bobblehead in a couple of races. So
the Lightning yesterday, Professor, would be one of the great races that was seen for some time, wouldn't it?
Oh, it was one of the best fields that I've seen. And Gelding and I had an argument about who'd win, and I was proven right in the end, much to his chagrin.
I see that.
So, all right, gentlemen, thanks for that discussion. What we'd ask our viewers to do is a couple of things. Number one, subscribe to Sportzfan Radio. You get to see great shows like this, and That's Racing on a Saturday. Not only that, we're on podcast now, on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. So we'd ask you to go there, subscribe. We've got some interviews up at the moment, the most recent being with Cameron Schwab. And also what I'll do is be carving up today's program into two segments, one on the AFLW and one on the NRL, to have that up during the week. So perhaps, Paul, you can get all your NRL followers to be following the Sportzfan Radio podcast.
Yep. I'll get on to it.
Professor, the Zinger count today for Paul was 9. Not a bad effort, but he had 2 prior to coming on air, so that don't count. So he's still behind his record.
Under double figures, gee, that's
under double figures. Must have been a serious discussion today.
You know what put him off? What put him off was waiting for you to come off the long run.
It was a very long run.
It was a long run.
It started in the grandstand, I think.
No worries. Well, thank you very much for this afternoon, gentlemen, and we'll see you all again next week. Until